Kia ora, Chris Parkin here, and this is a video tutorial for NZDP101, and we are on week 6, and this is the rotunda exercise. But before we start, just a quick reminder, you should have your calibration screen and had a look at that, and just make sure that your monitor's calibrated before you get going. And yeah, we'll get stuck in. So File, and we're going to open as Smart Object, and this thing doesn't resort for me. It just did. So I've just stored mine on the desktop for now, but anyway, we're going to go File, Open as Smart Object 106 Rotunda, and you'll see that it's come up with this little picture here. Now, we're going to be working non-destructively, which is a great option because it means that if you stuff something up, you can always go back and fix things later. And if you've got changes to do, like in this case, we're going to go into the camera raw file, and we can actually apply this filter to the image and go back and undo it and turn it on and turn it off if we need to. So yeah, the first thing we're going to have to sort out is these highlights, which have been overexposed. Now, you want to be careful when you're doing this. You don't want to pull them all the way back and turn them grey, because, whoops, helps if you don't zoom in quite that far. Alt minus will zoom us out. We don't want to go that far because, for starters, it ends up looking grey and lacking contrast, but also there's not much point with the clouds. We're going to have to replace them because they don't actually have any detail in there to recover, so we're just wanting to make sure that we don't have those red alarms going off. So that's the first thing. We're going to click OK, and if you want to come back and open up the shadows later, this is the nice thing about Camera Raw Filter. We can go back and open those shadows back up, pull those highlights back down a little, whoops, pull the highlights back down a little bit, and we can go and change things around later. Now, the downside to that is if you then clone, as we've got with a new layer, if you edit like that, you may find that things show up again. So actually the Camera Raw filter can be quite a useful option for cloning. What did we need to clone out? We're going to use the clone stamp tool to remove the healing brush. So we might as well, clone stamp to remove the lens flare. Darn dyslexia. So let's, where have we gone? Targeted adjustment, red eye, spot removal. There we go. So it's a slightly different terminology in this. We'll reduce the feather, and we're going to reduce the size. Now I'm just using the shortcut key on the keyboard, which is the square brackets, and you can see the double line around there. One of them is the feather and the other is the image. Is this where the image is going to be applied fully. So that's not too bad. It could be a little bit bigger, and it's on heal. Sometimes clone works better, and I think this one, actually the clone works better. So that's got rid of it in Smart Filter, and now if we go and adjust the exposure, you can't see that dot. And I'll show you the advantage to that, or the thing that you have to remember if you do it another way, because we're going to get rid of the dust, which is up here, using the spot healing tool. So new layer, and zoom in. So Alt, and if you've got a scroll wheel on your mouse, that will do that. And then spot healing brush. So that's the clone stamp. And where's my spot healing brush gone? Hang on a second. It's hiding, and this is the fun part about Photoshop. Sometimes things hide underneath something else. It's the spot healing brush tool, and it's actually under the patch tool. So we'll select that, and miraculously it actually does a really good job and pretty much gets rid of it in one go. So if I go back to the Camera Raw filter, and as I said, we change the exposure, then you'll note that, oh dear, that's changed the exposure, but it's still left the spot healing tool where it was. So just something to be aware of if you go and make major edits to the bottom layer that can cause problems, and actually looking at that, I should probably reduce the hardness on that layer and redo it, just so that there's a little bit more feathering to the transition. It tends to clean things up a little bit more. Of course, sometimes it doesn't pick the right spot that we are wanting it. So, what are you doing? Okay. That's not doing what I really wanted it to. That's working reasonably well. So if that doesn't work well, then the clone stamp tool actually allows you to pick a specific location like this one and drag it over, which is quite a useful option. Of course, you have to be careful that you don't drag something that's pre-existing or start creating repeating patterns and bits and pieces. So while we're at it, while we're getting rid of things that shouldn't be there, let's get rid of this piece of greenery around the edge just up here. So I'll select a new point. And the reason that I don't want that is it's going to detract from the final product. It's right at the edge and therefore grabs your attention much more than it necessarily should do. Okay, next one is the patch tool. So that was the one that we had previously hiding underneath the stamp, and I'll zoom in, do a new layer so that we've got that, and actually we can label these to keep an eye on them. It makes finding things later an awful lot easier. It is not something that I'm good at remembering to do. So we can select the area that we're going to patch, and then helps if you select the patch tool, and then you can select the darn it, hang on a second. Always helps if you don't have to blow your nose. Need the sample or layers function selected, and then we can select the area that we're wanting to patch from. We want it to line up pretty closely, and that's going to make the job of the computer much easier, but it's made a bit of a mess of the top end of the wire. So we'll reselect that and make sure we've got the wire layer selected again. Control D gives you a deselection. Oops. And let's try that there. That's starting to get better. You can see this one's a little bit darker than it necessarily should be, and I'm going to go back to the spot healing tool just to see whether or not that's going to pick it up slightly nicer. There we go. That's pretty good. So it's all using content aware fill, and it does generally do a pretty good job. If it's not, and you want to take control of exactly where you want it to grab the text, the replacement from, then yeah, the clone stamp tool is a pretty efficient way of doing that. And in fact, I'm going to use that for this. But what you have to be aware of is, you can see how we've got repeating patterns in the lines of the roof. Those repeating patterns are going to want to be continued. So when you select your sample point, you do want to make sure that that continues to come across, and if you've got a color gradient, then that can be a problem. And there's another line there. So yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful that you don't create patterns and don't remove patterns when you're cloning. So I just made that one a little bit bigger to fill that hole, and that's pretty good. One other tip is if you turn that on and off, you can see whether or not it's getting rid of anything that it shouldn't be, and if it is, go back and fix it. And of course, this is the nice thing about not working on the original image, because if we did this, and let's duplicate this layer, oops, sorry, duplicate layer, there we go, and rasterize, which is basically make it so we can actually draw on it. Oops, should have turned everything else off first. Oh no, that's alright, I did turn everything else off. If we now go and edit on this layer and clone out this, and we make a mess of it, and we go too far through and then realize that after we've done half a dozen or 20 odd other things, the history brush, which you can use and roll back what you've done, eventually goes, oh, I've forgotten what it was that I wanted to do, and you'll run out of that space to be able to do undo things. So you might find that you get, oops, resample that. You might find that you get all the way through here, and then you go, oh, hang on, I've made a mess of this. And, oh, I'll just go and undo it. Well, hold down Control, hold down Alt and Z. Hang on. I've just had to undo everything to do that. Or you could clone a new piece over it, but it's not going to look as nice as if you've sorted it out in the first place. So, depending on what you're cloning, nice blue sky, it's not too bad, but if you stuck something wrong in the middle of here, then pretty much the only way of getting it back is going back to the original, and it's just a pain in the neck to do. So much easier to do that non-destructively and allow yourself the ability to fix things when you need to. So yeah, it does make a huge difference. Okay, so our next thing we're going to do is the sky. So new layer, and we'll be good and rename this sky. And we're going to have to select the area that we want. So we want the clone stamp tool this time, aren't we? That's interesting. Okay, so oops, sorry, helps if I press the right button. I was pressing Alt. So I want to start cloning this off, and be careful that we don't grab any of the ground and introduce that, because that would look weird. And if you're careful, you can actually do quite a good job of this, but you do need to watch that there is a gradient. So if you have a look from up here to down here, you can see that the blue changes. And so if you resample and grab your new color from close by, it can tend to help and stop making too much of a mess. Okay, so that's not done too bad a job, but it's still a little bit patchy. So one of the things that we can do is grab that area, and we're just grabbing that layer itself, that one layer, the sky layer, and we can blur it. So we're going to go Filter, and which filter are we on? We're on Blur and Gaussian Blur. And so we can push that away. Now you can see that there's a bit of a tree poking through there, and there's a bit of a tree poking through the other side of things. So let's cancel that, and we will grab our patch tool and just patch up that. So if you grab the right brush, patch up that centerpiece a little bit more, and I'm going to tidy up my selection as well, so that I'm not blurring some of the area that is clear. Right, Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and there we go. That's looking much better. Now it's not great around this tree, because that has pushed over the top of it. So this is not in the instructions, but let's use a layer mask, and well, it's not in the instructions yet. Let's grab a layer mask and just go and tidy up that patch here. Now if we zoom in, oops, we've got that piece of the tree, and we've got to cut that tree off somewhere. Now there's two trees there. There's a light green and a dark green. So let's actually cut that off at the lighter green tree. So we'll change the hardness so that we can actually put in that edge. Now you can see from this that that blue that we've put in is not sufficient to cover up all of that tree, so we might need to go and finish that off and put some more in it in a sec. Yeah, that's going to need some more to deal with that, so hang on a tick. Seeing as this is not really part of the tutorial, I'll just pause it while I fix it. Okay, so next phase is going to be making the sky a darker blue. So we're going to choose select and then color range, and we're going to grab the sky, and let's just make sure that I might want to increase that fuzziness to grab a bit more of the sky. There we go, that's looking pretty good. We can always refine it later. So that gives us our selection, and then we want to grab a new layer. I didn't use the shift click, I just made the fuzziness bigger, didn't I, that time? That's alright. Okay, so we are going to grab a curves tool and come here. That's automatically applied the layer to that curves tool for me, that's nice. And we're going to drop that down, and we can darken the sky down there. You notice that's gone a bit blotchy. That would be our messy cloning that we didn't really do a nice job of. So we may need to go back and fix that, but that's all right. That's all part of the job. In fact, let's go back and fix it now. The interesting thing here is that we have an adjustment layer above that. So if we go and grab the clone tool, and yeah, we'll use the spot healing brush for starters, and we just click on it, it's not really going to do what we want. So if we grab the clone tool and select this point here, it's not doing too badly, but if it does something really weird, then you might have it set to all layers. You can see how it's given me a really dark blue blob, and the reason for that is it's taking all layers, including the curves adjustment, and then applying the curves adjustment to it, and then of course the curves adjustment's getting reapplied, and it just ends up getting messy and much darker than we originally intended. But if we go current and below, then we should be able to get that to work a little bit better. And I'm going to reduce the flow, because by adding a little bit at a time, you can sometimes alleviate the problem of and even things out. Needs to be, whoops, thank goodness for Control Z. And then I think that this one really needs our Gaussian blur hit back again at it again, because that has not, it's still a bit on the fuzzy side. Now that's going to fix it, except it's going to make a mess down here. So I'm going to have to refine that layer mask again later. But that's tough luck on that one. Actually, that's interesting. The layer mask normally doesn't do that when it's unlocked. If you lock it, then the layer mask will definitely blur at the edge. So let's do this a different way, and we'll use the blur tool in here, which is basically a brush tool, and you can brush over the specific area that you wish to blur out. and that's done a reasonable job of it. Still a little patchy, but we can always tweak it again later. Alright, so the next thing we need to check is, did that layer mask for the adjustment do a good job of darkening down everywhere? If you want to check exactly where that layer mask has gone, you can actually right click and you can see where it is in red. And it's not done a bad selection actually. It's not darkening down this top corner here, but let's, oops, I want to disable the layer mask, I want to do that. It's darkening it a little bit, and that's actually making it look reasonably realistic, so let's stick with that. Yeah, we can cope with that. Okay, but again, that's the nice thing about using a layer mask. If you do make a mess of something, then you can always fix it up. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this piece of tree and we're going to shove it over here. Why? Just because we feel like it. So that we need the polygon lasso tool. We'll select a new layer just so we've got that ready. Polygon lasso tool, and we're going to grab the edge of this, including the shadow, and we are going to new layer via copy, but we want to make sure we've got this layer selected so that it actually does that. There we go, right click layer via copy, and that's given us our tree. Now because the sun's pretty much directly overhead, if we want we can transform this and flip it. So Control T and we'll flip horizontal. Don't suggest you flip vertical, it doesn't work very well. And we'll probably want to get this reasonably close to lined up with the background as well, because that's going to be important when we put it in, that we don't want things misaligned, because it means the less work that we have to do when we get this finished. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is tidy this up and get it a mask there. So layer mask, and we are going to go reveal all, and then we're going to get our brush and grab the brush tool out, and we're going to get rid of the pieces that we don't want in there. So black conceals and white reveals, so we want our tool set to black at the moment so we can reveal what's going on there. And we're going to take a bit of time to, whoops, definitely want to keep the shadow. Probably really do want to keep that seat. We might just leave that seat for a little while. We'll do something different with that in a sec. Now, that rubbish bin is butt ugly. I'd really like to get rid of it, but we don't have something useful to get rid of it with. At the moment, the grass is going to cause us problems, because of course that grass would the grass runs out and it runs into the driveway. So let's not do that. Now that edge there is now really soft, so we actually want to change the hardness. Can't use the shortcut keys while you're zoomed in. So I'm going to change the hardness so that we can actually draw that edge of the tree quite nicely and not have a line run through it. And that's better. Okay. Some of the time when you're dealing with hardness it's useful to have, and some of the time it's not. It really does depend on what object you're going around, and when you're doing edges of trees, that's generally helps if it's a little bit softer and you've got leaves to do, so it's going to help if it's smaller, and it's just going to take time. So as tempting as I am to say, here's one I did earlier, I'm just going to pause the video. Okay, so basically that's finished, and it's a layer mask that gets rid of most of the irrelevant stuff, which is cool. And the next thing we need to do is get rid of that bin, because obviously that's going to be quite a distraction, being half chopped off, but also it's a rubbish bin and who really wants to see them? Plus the instructions tell us to. So we're going to clone it out. In this case, I'm just going to grab the clone stamp tool, new layer, and grab that stamp of that area and paint it out. Now, remember we changed the flow earlier, so that's not worked quite as nicely as it could have, because it didn't fully cover it in the first go. Having done that, I've looked at that and gone, oh, hang on, I've just gone over the top of that tree layer, the shadow. But if I pull this down here, you can see I've moved the layer underneath, and it's literally a stacking system. So if you've got a sheet of paper on top of another sheet of paper, you can't see what's underneath. And that was blended quite nicely, so I can't see the join. I'm quite happy with that. That can stay there. So the next thing we need to do is we need to do something about that other tree. Why? Because, well, a human eye doesn't like seeing duplications of things. You can kind of spot them a mile off, and if you look at that, you go, oh, there's an absolutely identical tree that's got a mirror in it. That doesn't happen very often in nature. Sometimes you'll get that with planting, where you've got multiple trees and they're planted next to each other, but even so there's a little bit of a difference between them. So we better go and clone that out just for the fun of it. But this time we've got a background, we've got an image in the background of the building. It's relatively symmetrical, so let's go and cut that out, and we're going to use that in the same way as we did the tree. And I'm just going to cut down the middle, and we're probably going to have to do some cloning to finish this off. We don't really want to cut the edge of the rotunda off, but we're going to have to grab that corner anyway. And we're going to do the same tool, new layer var copy, and that gives us that there, and Control T again, which gives us the transform, or you can go edit transform and flip horizontal. Now that doesn't line up quite correctly, so let's tweak that until it lines up reasonably close. Now there's a little bit of a vanishing issue where that's not quite lining up at the bottom, so the perspective warp might just help us fix that. If we can line it up with the bottom of the green that is there. It's looking a little pixelated, but that's because we haven't rendered it yet. So if we render that, that's looking not too bad. Let's, oops, darn it, get off. Yes, I know there's no pixel select. Let's grab that and see if we can line it up a little bit better, because the top of the building just got that little bit squished out of alignment. That's rather unfortunate. Now the bottom of the building is slightly out of alignment. Actually, that is a trick that's worth doing. If you drop the opacity, you can sometimes see exactly where the issue is happening and get things lined up a little bit more. Alright, that's close enough. I think we can probably fix that through cloning by the time we finish. Alright, so we've got a tree that we need to get rid of, and some bits of leaves and a join here, but that's pretty decent. There's a bit of mess down here as well. Where's that come from? It's interesting. Okay, well, we can fix it anyway. So we don't really want the spot heal tool. I'm going to use the clone stamp tool again because it gives us a little bit more control. And shrink down the sample size, and I'm going to grab the top of this apex and put it there. But if you look at that, that's going to go over the top of the window, so you need to reduce the size that we're sampling from again, and just clean that up. That's pretty good. Just take a oops. That's what happens when you do it non-destructively. You have to undo. What did I do? I grabbed it from put it on top of the same layer. Sometimes that's an advantage and sometimes it's a disadvantage. You can get so many layers that you get confused and lose track of where you are. But in this case, I'm just going to grab that because I don't want the I only want the peak there to join that up. So this is the building, and this is building fix, and this is why labeling your layers is useful. And this is where my dyslexia gets me, and I find that I've spelled something wrong and haven't even noticed. Such is life. Okay, so clone stamp, and we're going to clone stamp this off. We don't have a seat in the same environment, so we're going to have to just get rid of the seat, unfortunately, because that leaf is copying over half, or is blocking half of that, so we just need to tidy it up and get rid of it, which is a little bit of a shame, but such is life. What's that doing? Current and below. Why is it not fixing it? That's interesting. Sometimes that happens and you've got something... Okay, so that curve... That's where those things came from. This is actually a really good option to show you why these eye tools come in handy. That curve selection, you can see it's made a mess down here and it's picked up things that it really shouldn't have. So if we go back and get rid of them, and that's where those little lumps of light came in that shouldn't have appeared there. Obviously didn't notice it in the first time, but once you start playing around with things, sometimes that can show up later. So in fact we can just grab our selective adjustment tool and paint in all of that area. Now that should solve it. Okay, and this is the nice thing about the building fix. That's all one layer, so if I needed to I could go back and undo stuff, but I shouldn't have to. I should just be able to fix that up. And then we've got the lawns to do as well. And again, you're trying to make sure that if there are patterns, you don't have them repeating. There are slight stripes in these lawns, so if you're going to be really careful, you can make sure that those stripes actually stay in the right place. You can see how that's got a little bit messy on that edge where we've got the black and it's been cloned from the same location. So let's see if we can tidy that up a little bit. And sometimes just tidying it up is the easiest way of doing that, is going for a really small clone stamp to get rid of it. Okay, so we've got the building gone. That's not looking too bad. And the joint in the building, I only need a little bit. And then we've got to hide the rest of the tree. And so that's going to be interesting, because we want to clone pieces of these trees from behind. And I need to cough again. Alright, so let's have a go at getting rid of this tree. So we're going to need some background to play with, and the first thing that I'm looking at is, well, there's probably some background hiding behind that tree. So if we turn that layer off, yeah, we've got that rubbish bin there, but that's alright, we've already dealt with that. Then we can potentially use some of this background to fill things in. So let's grab our clone stamp, and remember about what I said with regards to things that are natural not being repeated, but sometimes people repeat patterns that are buildings, etc., or have had human influence on them. So let's repeat that circle, and we can even repeat the chair, and I'm going to put it in behind the building layer so that things line up reasonably quickly. We're still going to need some trees, etc., to plant in behind, and this time I probably don't want to repeat that big tree too many times because it will start to look odd. So we're going to have to look somewhere else for some other trees, and in this case I wonder if we can borrow something from over here. It's got blue sky behind it, so we don't really want that, but that might work. Let's see whether or not that's going to form a little tree in behind there. And we can see some of that building is still there from the original crop. Where's that coming from? That's interesting. That's covering it there. Oh, that's alright. That's covering it up now. I hadn't stamped enough. But the top of the building is not quite behaving itself there, so let's go and grab a layer mask and reveal all. Grab a brush and feather off that. We're going to use X to hide, and it should allow us to go through and hide most of those leaves. Now we don't want that leaf poking its ugly nose through because well, we do, but we're going to have to fix it shortly. And we want to clean up the side of the building as well at the same time. That's not looking too bad. Alright, so back to layer 7, which is our tree layer. And what are we going to stick in behind there? I think we'll go back to the original tree there and put that in. It's hiding reasonably well. It's by no means perfect, but that will have to do. And I want that piece of the conifer just to tuck in there and to knock back the shine of these leaves. That's not worked particularly well. Let's grab this tree here and put it in. And of course the challenge is to make sure that you don't end up with that repetition happening and still have it look natural. And needless to say, this type of cloning work takes time and patience to get right, and then we have to go back and do things like this one here. Okay, so this is going to take a bit of time to clean up, and we've got things that can help. We've got another seat that if we adjust the sample size to the right size, we can put in here and replace, although that's not working quite so nicely because that bench isn't fitting as well as it could do. So let's see if we can use the piece of the same bench and just extend it. There we go. There's a bit of a join that needs to be dealt with. But really it is an interesting challenge to put things together and to keep doing this, and it just takes time. And unlike painting, you're not generating the stuff from scratch, you're reusing whatever's been already there. So sometimes you have to be careful about where you're sampling from. But I still can't draw. I'd much rather be doing this. But you're not creating something from nothing, so you're still paying attention to shade and lighting, and if all else fails, you can always go back and undo. or start recloning from somewhere else. And you do want to try and avoid those patterns so that so that you're not sampling from the same location all the time. If it's natural. If it's not natural and it's got a pattern in it like the bench, then yes, by all means you want that repeating itself. But you can see here there's 3 leaves that have ended up repeating themselves, and there's the 4th. That's really not a good option, so if we delete one of them at least, then it clears that up. And remember, sometimes you might just need to go in and zoom in and get rid of a patch at a time, and sometimes you've got to just line those angles up, and it's an interesting challenge to say the least. So that's going to take a while to finish off. You'll note that there's a little bit of a bend here where the pieces haven't quite matched up, and I will show you a quick fix for that, because it is quite a useful tool. If we grab that selection, Control T and perspective, then we can shift that up and down a little bit until we can get that to line up. Now you want to be careful that that's not messing up anything in the background, which it doesn't appear to have yet. Let's get rid of the selection lines. Come on, get rid of the selection lines. I got rid of the whole thing. What went wrong there? Control D, there we go. So that selection didn't work because it grabbed and moved our trees as well. So Control Z, undo, and if we're going to do that again, we need to make sure that we actually select the whole of the trees. So let's just do another trick to find that selection and get it right. If you go right click on the number, and we should be able to select from transparency, which is not coming up, so let's do okay, that's interesting. Either I can't see it or it's not there, so we'll go another way. We'll go layer mask from transparency, and then we can go add to selection. That's better, because that's now got all of our tree, etc. in there. Disable layer mask because we don't want it. In fact, we can delete the layer mask. Undo that. That would be the downside of this. It's grabbed it's put a white background in there, so I don't want to do that either. Drat. Okay. We will duplicate the layer. There's always a way around this one. Layer mask, and from transparency, and grab the selection, add to master selection, and then we can just delete that whole lot. Go away. Now let's delete layer mask, and it's not going to let me do that either. Hang on a sec. I figured out what I'd done wrong. When I selected that area, I'd hit delete, and of course it only deleted the selected area, so that's not going to do what I want. What I can do, however, is go and untick sample all layers and select the outside of this layer, so the area that's got nothing in it, which gives me a selection, which is always nice, and then I can go inverse selection. So select inverse. Now that has now selected all the stuff inside, including the trees and this piece here, but it's also selected this area down here. That's going to be annoying because I don't want that. So what I want to do is deselect any areas that I select from now on, or subtract from selection. So I want that patch there to be unaltered by the change that I'm about to do. And now I've only got the area with the tree selected. That's great. Control T and perspective. And now I should, all going well, be able to put that perspective in place to make these things line up, and it's not messed up my trees at the same time, which is brilliant. Okay, Control D. Still some tidying up to do. There's some cloning work to even up and a little bit of joins to just do, just to nudge into the right place. But it's going to be a lot easier to fix up. And again, it's a case of rinse and repeat and keep going until all of that cloning work is done. And I'm going to pause it because I suspect you've seen enough of me doing cloning, and really it is the same task over and over. Find a piece that looks right and clone it out. Make sure that your sampling method is going to do what it needs to do, and try not to repeat things that look natural. And if all else fails, turn the layer off and go and have another go at it. And in fact, turn the layer off and see what's working and what's not. Some of those trees are working reasonably well. The green ones there, not so much, to the point that actually I wouldn't mind just darkening them down a little bit, and that's a perfectly valid option. So if we grab the eyedropper tool and grab a darker green, grab the pen tool, we've got a new layer, and we're going to turn the hardness down to really soft and paint on there. Now that's not a good option because at the moment it looks like we've just got paint sitting there. But if we change the blend mode, and we change the blend mode to overlay, that's knocked it back a little bit, but it's not really done what I want. Multiply darken doesn't work. Multiply's done it, but it's been a little bit too vicious, so we can drop the opacity back. Now this is something we'll cover as we go later on, but it's a nice way of being able to clean up areas and get them to match color-wise. Okay, so yeah, it's a case of carrying on. And I'm going to give myself a rest for a second, because the last thing we were going to do was the final touches, which was lightening up underneath here and a crop. Now, what else do we need to do? Oh, let's turn the tree back on just so that it's there. Now, we've got rid of all these trees. I wonder what that means. Yeah, if we got rid of those trees, is there something else that should have gone at the same time? Have a look at image 4 on the PDF and see if you can work out what it is. Sometimes it's a case of playing spot the change, or spot the difference, or spot what's wrong. Where's Wally? So we're going to grab the curves tool and lighten up just the underside of the rotunda. Now that's not lightened up the underside of the rotunda, that's lightened everything. But if we take our layer mask and go Control I, that's now darkened everything, or left it back the way it was. And now we can take our layer mask and stamp and just put that colour back in there. That's a bit brighter than I'd really want, so we can pull that back a touch. No, I don't think it needs it on that side, so we can delete that back again and leave that in shadow. And the last thing was the crop, wasn't it? So we could use the rule of thirds, which is always a good starting point. Tend to do most of the update work first though, so that if you want to change something later you can, and always make sure you delete cropped pixels is off if you're working non-destructively, because if I crop that and then I decide that if I've got delete crop pixels on ticked, it'll get rid of the stuff that we're cropping off, and then I won't be able to go back and tweak it again later. So something to be aware of in that tweak. I might just bring that in a little bit, because it was leaving a little bit of a white gap in that corner, which is a little bit of a distraction. So yeah, if you hadn't guessed, it's the shadows there that still need to be removed. I've still got some work to do there, but it's starting to come together. So hopefully that gives you the skill set that you need to finish it off. Obviously I've still got some work to go and do to finish mine off, but I hope it helps. Cheers.